Thank you for coming. And if you're watching us on Facebook or on YouTube, thank you for that. I will have to say, we have some extremely observant people who are watching us online. Because about 3 weeks ago, I started getting some people on our Facebook channel saying, "Why are you preaching with your hands in your pockets all of a sudden?" You might be wondering the same thing. Well, I probably should come clean. About 3 weeks ago, my left shoulder is just torn all to shreds, and we don't know what's going on. And it was either this or put it in a sling and try to get sympathy from you, and you're not that sympathetic. I know most of you. So tomorrow we get to take a trip to an orthopedic surgeon who hopefully will let me start to take my hands out of my pockets again. But I will say this, if I did with my left arm while I was preaching what I do with my right arm, you would hear some things that aren't very sermon-like. It would be swift. So thank you for your observations. That's kind of neat. I want to show you 4 signs of life this morning. Because they do have to do with life, and we'll get to those. But you can just shout out when you think you know what they are. Do you know what this symbol means? It means pause. That's pretty good. Do you know what this symbol means? Fast forward. All right, very good. We're not going to need this one. Even though you think that's a symbol of life, it's really not. Do you know what this one is? Rewind. We're not going to need this one. You know what this symbol is? Play. I'm having some, okay. All right, I'm having some competition here from our security. We let you hear that just because we want you to know that we have security on staff. But, you know, you guys can, you're competing with me. And I want to talk to you about the symbols pause and play. One of my daughters and her husband came in this past week for a few days, and we had a day trip planned. And we were real excited about it. That evening when they got here, we found out there's no gasoline. No gasoline anywhere. I had a full tank of gas. But we sat around the living room all feeling all bummed out and not knowing what to do. And we said, well, I guess we just won't take that day trip tomorrow. And I couldn't sleep well that night. I was irritated. I was irritated at my response to no gas. I'm thinking, I've got gas in the car. I've got a full tank of gas. Why don't we just go on the trip? I've got a full tank of gas. We're going to sit inside our house. We're going to sit behind closed doors because we're scared we might run out of gas. And I couldn't sleep. And you know, everybody was bummed because we weren't going to get to take the day trip. I was irritated at myself. So next morning I woke everybody up and I said, going on the trip. And we did. Now, you might say, if you're a fearful person, well, what if you needed that gas later? What if you had to get to the hospital or something? Well, I'd call an ambulance and use their gas. What if you ran out of food? I'm 2 miles from the grocery store. I walk. What if this? What if this? I started thinking of how sick I am of my responses to the world around me. So I told the family, I said, look, the one thing that's not an option for our family is to hide in our house in fear of what might happen. I want you to remember the word might as I go through this message today. One option was not to sit in our home and wonder if we might find gasoline. That was just not an option. Listen, I don't know if you realize this, but most of the things you worry about never happen. That is a scientific, it is a well-researched truth. Most of what we worry about never happens. Now, when it does happen, you know what we do? And I know you do this because you're living and you're breathing and you're sitting here today. When something happens that we worry about, here's what we do. We deal with it and we move on. Wow. That's what the Christian faith teaches us to do. You deal with life and you move on. When Jesus said, I came to this world to give you the fullest life possible, hiding in fear was never part of the equation. Never. Jesus never said it's okay to go into hiding concerning your faith. I hope that you Jesus followers, and those of you who are here, you are. Those of you who are on Facebook and YouTube might get a little stoved up during this message, but I'm going to encourage you to do some things with that maybe you haven't done in a long time. But I really hope that us Jesus followers feel like I do about that gas problem. I hope you're sick and tired and maybe even a little embarrassed, as I was, over being afraid of the might-be's. Oh, this might happen. This might be this way. This might be this way. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, there's a story that you've probably heard. Even if you're not a believer, you've probably heard the story of David and Goliath. David was a little guy. Goliath was a big guy. Let me kind of fill you in on his story. It didn't start with David killing Goliath. It started years and years before. David had 7 brothers, and they were all Navy SEAL kind of guys. They were big. They were tough. And here's David. Scripture says he was a good-looking guy, but he was small and kind of frail. The 7 brothers grew up, and they all joined the military. They were warriors. They were fighting men. And David, he wants to join the military. And his dad says, no, I need you to stay at home. I need you to go out in the field and watch over my sheep. David's like, oh, man. Here, my brothers, they're going to fight in God's army. They're going to defeat the biggest enemies on the planet. And I get to watch my daddy's sheep. You see, his brothers, they were real warriors. Or so they thought. Or so they said. David was a little bitty nobody, or so he thought. Or so he said. David was nothing more than a rancher's assistant. Or so he thought. One day David was out in the field. He was probably, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years old. Little frail guy watching his daddy's sheep. Bounce around like little sheep do. And his 7 brothers, they're off in battle. And they're fighting a group called the Philistines. The Philistines were non-believers. They were opposed to God's people, the Jews of the day. So you've got on one side of this great valley, this great army, you've got God's warriors, all of David's brothers. They were fighting men. They were over here on this side. They had their camp all pitched. Their tents were there. And on the other side of the valley, you had the Philistines. These were bad guys. And the bad guys were trying to literally wipe God's people off the face of the earth. So you got 2 armies, and they're standing each other. But the scripture says this, they never fought. They stood and they yelled back and forth at each other. Have you ever done that? Gotten somebody's faith, you're back and forth, and you're thinking, this isn't getting us anywhere. But that's what was happening. Bad guys are yelling across the valley at God's people. God's army, they're yelling across the the valley at the bad guys. And all of a sudden, the Philistines, they did this. They said, we got a guy. And we'll send him out, and you send your best fighter out, and we'll just let him go at it, and whoever wins, wins it all. If our guy wins, then God's army, you're prisoners to us. If you win, then we're prisoners to you. Just one guy, one fight, one battle, one day. Cage match. Gonna be awesome. Philistines send out Goliath. Goliath, scripture tells us Goliath was 9 feet tall. His armor weighed 125 pounds. He had a spear that weighed 15 pounds. That's what scripture says. This was a big guy. So what happens? Who's God's army going to send out to face Goliath? Well, the answer to that's clear. Nobody. Apparently somebody said, you got a gas shortage. You need to hide in your tent. Because you don't have enough gas, boys, to defeat Goliath. So the best thing you can do is hide in your tent. And that's what they did. All of the warriors of Israel ran to their tents, and they're peeking out through the tent. And they're saying, he's so big, he might hurt us. The might be's. Goliath is so big, he might hurt us. And that's where they stayed. All of a sudden, David was tending his daddy's sheep. And his dad called him in and he said, look, David, I want you to take this food and this drink. I want you to take it to your brothers who are on the front lines fighting the great battle for God. What he didn't know. So David, he takes the food, and as David's starting approaching, he sees this giant Goliath hurling these insults over across at God's people. And he goes to the camp and he says, hey, what's going on? And his brothers immediately, they get ticked off at David. They said, look, you need to be back tending daddy's sheep. We're fighting a battle here. David's thinking, doesn't look like you're doing anything but hiding in a tent. So look at 1 Samuel 17:32. David actually goes to the king of God's army and he says, hey, don't worry about this Philistine. David told King Saul, I'll fight him. 7 brothers, great warriors, hiding in a tent. And you got this kid, David. He has no training. He has no army behind him. He has no weapons. And he says, I'll fight him. What was the difference? You see, David would not allow, I want you to hear this, David would not allow the might be's to creep into his mind. Because once a might be creeps into your mind, it will change the way you react to the world around you. David would not allow that. And here's what I can see. All of those great army men of God, all of his brothers, they're peeking out the tent flap at Goliath, and they're all saying, oh, he's so big, he might hurt us. David's looking out at him and saying, that guy's so big, I can't miss him. Can't miss. I mean, there was an enemy standing before God's people, and God's people are looking bad. They were looking bad. Every man hiding behind that tent flap was a bad witness for the power of God. And they were hiding because they believed in the might be's. But I'm here to tell you, Goliath was nothing more than a virus. He was nothing more than a nasty virus for someone to defeat. Not to run from, not to hide from, but defeat. And yet so many who claim to be part of God's mighty army, as soon as something bad hit, they ran into hiding. They hit the pause button. David was way too small. David was not nearly equipped well enough. David had not had his anti-Goliath vaccine. But what David did have was confidence that the God he said he believed in was able to protect him. That's what David had. The confidence that God would protect him. Now, I'm not making light of what's going on in the world today. I'm really not. Because God understands when we need to back off a little bit from the world. He understands that. God understands when we get a little bit nervous about the things around us. He understands that. Look at 1 Samuel 17:40. David was on the way out to fight Goliath. He had a slingshot. He needed some rocks, so he goes down to a brook. And look at what it says. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream, put them in his shepherd's bag, and then armed only with his shepherd's staff and a slingshot, he started to cross the valley to fight the Philistine. You know the story and I know the story. David only needed 1 rock because he popped the Philistine first rock out of the sling, popped him right in the head, killed him. He only needed 1 rock, but he picked up 5. And that's where I think God gives you some room and me some room to be a little anxious in life. I'm sure David probably picked up that first rock and said, you know, God can take care of business with this, but maybe just in case I ought to take a few more rocks. Look, God understands when you're anxious about your Goliaths. He understands it. He just doesn't give you permission to stay anxious. Look with me to Philippians 4:6. Here's what Scripture says. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. You see, God understands your anxieties. He understands when you're anxious. He understands when you're afraid. He just doesn't give you permission to stay there if you say, I'm a Christ follower. He doesn't. Okay, back to 1 Samuel. Look at 1 Samuel 17:45. David replies to Goliath, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. I come to you with one thing only, in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you are defiling. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I'll kill you and cut off your head. This is a teenage sheep herder. You're not going to kill Goliath. You're not going to cut this guy's head off. That's what Goliath thought. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know there's a God in Israel. That's the important part. That's what I'm encouraging you to do today with your life. Act as if the whole world is going to know that God is God, because it's time. It's time, church. It's time. Act as if the whole world will know that God is God. Verse 47, and everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people. Not with a sword, not with a spear. This is the Lord's battle. He will give it to us. Listen, for over a year, the whole world has been wrapped up in a virus. And March of 1 year ago, we did this. We did this. And you know something? This was a good thing to do. It was good. Because contrary to what some people said and proclaimed and preached from pulpits, the virus was no joke. Still not. Still not a joke. The whole world separated from one another. We separated ourselves from one another. The church separated from one another. That wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't a bad thing. But it's time to do this again. Which way? This way? Okay. Okay. I've been drinking, so yeah. And the only reason I say that is just to make Pharisee type people mad. Yeah. It's time to hit this one again, church. And I'm talking to community, and those of you who are here, you're saying, hey, we're hitting it. That's good. That's good. It's time for the world to know that now we walk in the power of God. We were walking in the power of God before. We still are walking in the power of God. It's time to stop hitting the pause button in the church and start hitting the play button again. Why do I say that? Because of this. The church is the absolute only thing Jesus Christ left on the earth when he went to heaven. It's all he left behind. And if we're going to change the world, I'm telling you, there's not a plan B. He's not going to use the Rotary Club. If you're in the Rotary Club, pardon me. He's not going to use your school system. He's not going to use the government. He's going to use his church. I can't believe nobody's saying anything but me. You're just like, stop hitting the pause button, church. Heavens. If this arm flops, you're going to hear me say something. I'm telling you. And I'm getting ready. Look, church is the only thing he left behind. And here's my question. Why would he leave the church with us if he didn't mean for us to use it to the fullest? Nothing else on earth has the protection from the gates of hell but the church. So here's what I'm saying. It's time to reconnect. Those of you who are in the room, it's time to really get back involved, not just sitting in a service, but live and in person, in your groups, in service to other people. For 23 years, Community Church has been in existence. Our mission has been this: to be a safe place for people to explore the claims of Christ, experience life change, and grow to full Christian maturity. You cannot help your church defeat the Goliaths in this world hiding behind the tent flaps. You can't. You can't. You can't fully help your local church change the whole world sitting in front of a TV or a computer screen. Now let me say something to you for those of you who are sitting in front of a TV or a computer screen. Live streaming, Facebook, YouTube, those things are awesome. We're able to communicate with you. They're awesome when you can't get out. But when you can get out, get out. If you're worried about not having gas in your car, I'm telling you, you call Community Church. If you're within 20 miles, we'll come pick you up. We'll do it. And if you're not within 20 miles, there's another local church in your area that will come and pick you up. It's time to hit the play button once again. Look, if you're shut in today and you're listening to this message and you're getting a little bit wadded up, like who does he think he is? Well, I'm a representative of Jesus Christ through the church, so that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. If you're a shut in, or if you're in a part of the world listening to this message and there are no local churches, watching from your home is a wonderful, wonderful thing. If you are not a shut in, if there is a local church in your area, it's time to hit the play button again. The church Jesus left to change the world needs every one of you. Every one of you. It's time to hit the play button. Look, COVID slowed us down. That's okay. We were able to think through some things when COVID slowed the church down. We're able to do some things a bit different than we've ever done it before. COVID made some people sick. Some of you. COVID had some people die. Heart disease makes some people sick. And heart disease will make some people die. Cancer has made some people sick and will make some people die. The flu, old age, car accidents. Look, Jesus said in this world you're going to have all those things. You know why? Because there's no way to stop them. When Adam and Eve sinned, it brought death to this world. You are on the way out. I hate to break the news to you. We are all on the way out. But listen, Jesus never told anybody to stop living a full life until they just breathe their last breath. So if you've been paralyzed by any Goliath in your life today, I'm telling you, start moving again. Come back to the land of the living. Because we're not in the land of the living. We don't live in the land of the living going to the land of the dying. We're in the land of the dying. And we're headed to the land of the living. Headed to the land of the living. If you've been paralyzed by any Goliath, now it's time. Now it's time. Just be the Christ follower you said you were before your Goliath came to visit you. Hit the play button again and leave all else to God. One of my favorite saints is a man named Father Damien. He lived in the 1800s and he felt a calling to one of the islands of Hawaii. It was not a resort then. It was the island of Molokai, and that's where they shipped lepers to die, and leprosy is a horrible, horrible disease. Father Damien signed up for the task of going there and loving lepers. You should read his story. He went to Molokai, and he started hospitals, and he built schools for them, and he loved on them. He would physically bind their wounds. And it was like, oh, they're sick. You know, they might give me something. There's the might be's. But Father Damien, he just kept being Jesus to these people. And every time he would preach a message for 11 years, he would preach to the lepers, and he would say, you lepers can have a great eternity in Jesus Christ. That's the way he would always start his messages. You lepers can have a great eternity in Jesus Christ. And one day Father Damien stood up in front of them, and he said, we lepers can have a great eternity in Jesus Christ. Father Damien died a leper. But until his dying day, he bound the wounds of those with leprosy. Enough hiding behind the tent flaps. It's time to hit the play button, church, and start living again. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you that Jesus died for this great thing he called the church. Over every age, people have said that the church is dying and the church is dead. And those people are dead. Those who have been a part of the church and part of Jesus Christ, those of us today who have said yes to Jesus, who are a part of his great church, though our bodies die, yet shall we live. Absent from the body will be present with your Son. That's the great promise. So we can face today and we can face tomorrow with all of the strength that you give us. It's time that the church started operating again, started loving not just one another again, but get out into the world and start being who Jesus asked us to be when he created this thing called church. I look forward to the future because lives will still change, because Christ followers have hit the play button once again.